the rest of the people to join. Welcome to Atom's. Oof, what are we at? I think we're at. I think this is our ninth installment in our webinar series looking at AI and technology in the research ecosystem. We've been really pleased with how these have gone so far, and I hope you guys feel that too. I see a lot of repeat attendees as well, so hey to everybody. We're really excited to have Neil Johnson on the webinar today. Neil is going to talk a little bit about the science of when good AI goes bad. Just to go through a little bit of the agenda today for everybody. We'll go through some introductions. I'll let Neil speak a little bit about herself as well, and then we'll roll straight through into Neil's talk. So we'll save some time for Q&A after the talk. As mentioned, we will focus on getting through the talk so we have enough time to get through everything. And then if you could put your comments in the chat, in the kind of, there's a chat button below. We'll come back to those during the Q&A. Sorry, Neil, could you just mute yourself while I'm talking? There's a bit of an echo on your... and then, yeah, we'll do a Q&A, and then we'll finish off with just a little bit about what Atom is, why we're kind of putting these webinar series together. And yeah, that should round us out to the hour. So just very quickly, a little bit about the speakers. So as myself, I'm Tom. I'm one of the co-founders here at Atom Grants, and I come from a kind of research and technical background myself. So studied physics in the UK up to a master's, and then moved into the kind of tech world as a founding engineer for a couple of years. But I've been building Atom, who's hosting this webinar, basically to build AI tools to support the research ecosystem. With us today, we have Professor Neil Johnson, it's our honor to have you. Neil is a professor at George Washington University, where he leads research at the intersection of science and data science. And he also has a research group and a consulting group called DAITA or Data. I presume it's called. I'll let you talk a little bit more about that as well. But they're on a mission to make black box AI systems transparent and explainable. Neil, over to you. You want to give a little brief about yourself, and then we can roll into your talk.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably up to 7 billion people on the planet worried about when AI is going to turn bad, and not bad necessarily in the sense of junk, but something that looks plausible but is not quite correct, whether they're in the doctor's office and that's when it happens, or with a lawyer, or that's when it happens, or on a plane and that happens. And we're just trying to get to the bottom of that. And we were excited to be working with Atom. Atom's a very good name because you will see in the talk that Atom is sort of the key to the answer to this. So back to you, Thomas.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, do you have are you going to present some slides or
Yes.
Okay, cool. So over to you, really. You've got the floor. Feel free to share your screen. There's a button at the bottom there. All right. It's got it's like a screen with a little arrow coming out of it.
Yeah. Got that. Yeah.
Cool.
So let's see if this...
Yep, and see your screen. Perfect. If you could go into full screen. Awesome. Take it away, Neil.
Great. Okay. So, we all know data goes in and something comes out. And this isn't going to increasingly happen everywhere in the world, including in universities on every level, whether you're feeding in some kind of it could be just finances from the last few years, or, bylaws, or some kind of local law, or compliance. And something comes out. But what we'd really like to know is what's going on under the lid. First of all, for legal reasons, and second of all, because we actually want it to do some good rather than some bad. There are a lot of people thinking about how to make AI better, in the sense of higher performance against some measure. But there aren't that many people thinking about how to make it understandable and therefore to see when it might be going wrong. Who am I? It's not, I haven't just wandered into this from nowhere. For many years, I've been dedicated to trying to build kind of simple models, simple understanding, everyday understanding, but also mathematical understanding of how complicated systems work. Might be traffic, might be financial markets, doesn't matter. They all show different behaviors that kind of emerge. And so I don't know why this is going through so fast. There we go. And so this is another one of those. We have a book coming out in 2 weeks on more on this. But today, I just want to take you through the core takeaways of what we found so far. As I said, lots of companies, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, trying to understand how this will all play out in terms of safety and performance. But what we're trying to do is to make it understandable. And so that's not necessarily their mission. Their mission is to make money. So it's all down to trust. Should we trust our AI? I mean, we've got to decide this for our work, for our personal life. Do we use, sorry, this is kind of clicking on, it shouldn't be clicking on, but should, if you use your, on your phone or on a lap, if you use that at work, are you liable for any answer that it gives? And should you therefore be doing due diligence in some way? And this is what we're really trying to get the bottom of. Can we empower employees in any company, universities, administrator, anything, with enough understanding that A, they're covered themselves personally, B, the organization is covered. Hopefully kind of see that their AI is actually doing something useful for them. So trust is a weird thing. How many of us get in a metal tube every year and pay thousands of dollars maybe, and in the trust that we're going to end up somewhere on the other side of the world, or somewhere, far away, or somewhere not that far away. We put our kids on it. We let everybody go on it in our family, and we pay money for that. Why do we do that? Not that we understand. I don't think I understand exactly why, a double deck, Airbus is going to fly in the air, but I do know that there's lift, and I do know that there's gravity. And I hope that somebody has worked out that those two need to balance. Well, what are the forces pushing and pulling inside the machine that make it go towards good and bad? And this is really our work that we've been doing so far, just to give you a kind of, an insight that the industry is beginning to take notice of what we're doing here. What I'm going to tell you is making some difference. So over to, let me just go over to this. I'm sorry, I'm dealing with slideshow that wants to go faster than me. So what does a transform? What does T in T means transformer. So GPT, anything, Gemini, Claude, they all have transformers in them. What's a transformer? It's basically like a row of heads, not human heads, but a row of heads that pay attention to the input and what they've been trained on. So they pay attention to these two things. They pay attention to what's coming in, the context in which it's coming in, and how that kind of balances against what they've been trained on. And then it passes through all these rows, and then it spits out something on the side, which you may think is G is good, G for good. And that goes over and over and over again. So you can imagine feeding in some, university document or some student report or some financial report, and then trying to get some kind of sense of, this is now going to tell me what a good strategy would be. But it does it piece by piece. It feeds in a piece, spits out another piece, adds that onto the pieces it's already fed in, and it goes through this iterative process. What we found in our work, and this is without giving you the kind of all the math, nobody wants that at lunchtime on a Tuesday, but without going through all that math, we've been able to work out where the machine, as this information is passing through all these heads, where its kind of North Pole is pointing. How these machines work is that they develop a North Pole in terms of predicting then the next output that they're going to create. What's the next sentence? It's like, yeah, and you should ignore last year's financial reports. Okay, fine. So where does it get that sense of what should be the next output? It gets that from this North Pole, this kind of compass needle that it develops. And what we've managed to do is work out where that compass needle is pointing. So again, I know it's Tuesday lunchtime. You don't want to see vectors, but at least this is kind of ACT vectors, high school vectors. So imagine there is a direction in some, it could be like a geographical map. There's a direction where the input sits, which is like, it could be imagine it an analogy. It's some region of a city. where that's where all the input is. And the good output that you want, in other words, the desirable, reliable, factually based output, is in some region not so far away from it. And the compass needle, which is the purple lines, as the input keeps expanding because it keeps generating new output and adding that to the input, what happens is it adds on to that compass needle. The problem is that that compass needle, as we've shown in the mathematics of what goes on in the machine, can at certain times, because it's balancing the forces of where it's been against where it thinks it's heading versus what it's being trained on, that compass needle can turn. And it will turn before the output turns. That is the key thing. There is a predictable, deterministic point at which this machinery, and it doesn't matter if we're talking about Claude or GPT-5 or GPT-6 or GPT-23, whatever that will look like, they all have tipping points. So we are now actively, and we're excited to be working with Atom on this, because it's almost like, oh my goodness, now we've, why is gold colored? Oh, if we know what's going on at the level of the atoms all the way through to the solid, we can work it out. And so that's what we've managed to work out. And so we've managed to work out when it will suddenly tip, and it will tip from good to bad. Now, maybe it doesn't tip until, page 38, and you've only printed out 36 pages, and anyone in a meeting, as we all know, only reads the first one or two. So they'll never notice this bad output, but maybe it tips in the third sentence. And so how can you go around guessing that? You can't. And all the guardrails that exist now for AI are post fact. In other words, they would look at this output switching from good, because I've got G, to bad, and it would then kind of run in. These are the guardrails that exist for all the companies. OpenAI, this is what they're doing with GPT-5. This is when they kind of, and all the AI, when it corrects to try and remove, kind of bad outputs. All it does is jump in there, find when the bad output starts happening, and mask it. In other words, suppress it. Yeah, but you've already had some bad output. If this was a plane, it's like trying to stop it crashing after it's crashed, because you can only crash once. Once you crash, the damage can be done. And they estimate that, this tipping alone that I'm showing you here, $67 billion of damage last year, $67 billion. We've all maybe heard that, kind of fictitious law cases being cited in court, which came out of GPT, GPT-4, whatever, precisely because of this reason. Students suddenly, who are using AI as kind of counselors, friends, turns out that, most teens now trust AI output, AI counseling more than their friends. So, suddenly it's switching. It's not switching with, 5 verbs and no nouns and the sentence is the wrong way around. It looks plausible. It sounds plausible, but it's going to do undesirable output, but what we call bad output. So this is a crucial problem to understand. I'm not sure if it's a funnier case than Air Canada, their chatbot that was spitting out absolutely fine responses to people complaining that they'd lost their baggage, suddenly starts offering them, I think it was $500,000 compensation. And they took it. And Air Canada lost a lot of money. Imagine that in a university setting or in a bank setting or in a medical setting. So that's where we stand. Not going to take you through the mathematics. Where we imagine using it, just a reminder that this is what goes on in the transformers. So suddenly we can get an idea when this audience is tipping, when its North Pole is tipping. Where do we imagine using it? I'll come back to those slides. Well, anything that we're going to be doing in the future in any setting is going to involve probably some agentic AI, in the sense that, you're not going to be sitting there prompting an AI all the time. It's going to be off doing its tasks. But what we can do is set in this little kind of compass needle check into the AI steps, such that it will keep it it will at least have a kind of warning light comes on. After all, isn't that what we all want? A kind of warning light, not when it's started to produce bad output, which the user may never notice, but before it does. And also give you an idea of when it's beginning to tip. Both Tom and I are physicists, so I don't want to take you through all of that, but there are actual real mathematical theories from physics that map onto this, interestingly, related to how, things kind of coagulate, how, kind of cohesion develops within the machine. I'm not going to drag you through that. But what I am going to do is try and emphasize this idea that, individually, each of us, if we use this in a workplace, I mean, I don't know about your institutions, but mine hasn't worked out. I don't know what would happen if I use AI, which I do for committee meetings, and suddenly it goes wrong and I didn't realize. And suddenly, is the university liable for that? Am I liable for that? Well, they haven't said that I can't use it. It's my account. They're thinking of having their own accounts, and therefore we all use it. Then are they liable? Is the company liable that produced the AI? We're going to have a chatbot in our institution. Is that going to be liable when that starts spitting out wrong information? Is it the person who wrote it, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, it's a nightmare legally, but also in terms of just the optics. So due diligence, I think, is key. And this insight gives due diligence in a way that no other tools do. So with that, I'm going to leave you because it was forcing me through. I know it thinks it's lunchtime. So I will leave you with that. And I think there's probably going to be a lot of questions, which I love the questions. I can't always answer them because some of these are just open research. But love to hear questions, and thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Neil. I can open with some of the questions and then yeah, keen for people to come off mic and ask anything. But yeah, really interesting. I just there was one term that you used that maybe you could define for everyone, which is like agentic AI. Like what do you mean by that?
Yes. So this is, if anyone hasn't heard this, and there's no reason you should, but this is coming. This is, instead of, imagine we just sit there and use AI when we have a question or we want to discuss something with it. It will spit back a prompt, spit back a prompt, but only when I spit back an answer, but only when we prompt it. Imagine instead you set it a task. Well, actually, I've got a committee meeting. I'm thinking of doing this today, actually. I've got a committee meeting tomorrow. There's all these documents from all these minutes from the last few meetings. I haven't got time to go through them. And also, there's this new regulation around that I've heard about. And also, I've been sent some other documents from other universities that do something similar. I can't get my head around this. Got to go to the dentist, got other things to do. I've got to teach a class. I just can't get my head around this. So if I feed this in to an agentic AI, an agent that acts for me, can it synthesize all this and give me effectively what 10 hours of my time would have done? And so this is what agentic AI is. Think of it like a personal assistant holding the personal assistant. The personal assistant we all think of as GPT-5 or something like this, or ChatGPT, as everyone kind of tends to call it. But now imagine there's a kind of secretary also overlooking that to kind of understand when to deploy it, what documents to feed it, what things to ignore, and schedule the meeting maybe even, and then write the agenda for the meeting. That's agentic AI. It's the use of AI where you also have an agent that's software as well on top of it to manage the AI. So it may make multiple calls to the AI, but this is where it will appear in all of our workplaces.
Absolutely right. So it's basically an AI that just repeatedly kind of goes off and does its own work. You mentioned, I had a second follow-up question on what you just mentioned, that you use, AI in your day-to-day committee meetings. I'm sure a lot of the people here are interested, like, yeah, how do you currently use AI in your day-to-day? Can you give any kind of concrete, what are you using it for in those committee meetings?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you the plan B that I use because I always have a plan A, but I never have time to do it. So I have the plan B. Plan B, I literally feed in the last few minutes of meetings. I mean, the minutes of the last few meetings, the latest, if I've been sent some document about new or upcoming kind of regulations that are coming out. Maybe I'll put in the bylaws of whatever departments are being discussed. Maybe I'll put in some kind of a feedback that we've got from students, that just free form feedback, and I just bundle it all in and say, make sense out of this. We got a committee meeting tomorrow. Make sense out of this. How can I synthesize this? How can I put this together? How can I make a plan for the future that kind of satisfies all these and doesn't go against any of the things that you find? And put that together. Tell me what tell me the timeline, and also organize meetings so that we can put this into place with the various key holders, stakeholders. And by the way, you've got access to my contacts list, so just email them and tell them when those meetings are. And then I go off to the dentist and I go off to do my classes. Ideally, I'd be going through this myself at the same time. That would be plan A, but it never happens.
Yeah, awesome. Does anyone else have any questions that want to come off mic? Now's the time.
Yeah, I'd love to ask a question. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian. Yeah, you're up, and then we'll come out.
So, Neil, I'd love to ask about your perspective. One of the things I've seen that comes up a lot is AI, and especially agentic AI, brings into question the concept of reification. And so to explain that, it's basically AI looking at something that's an abstract concept as a concrete, quantifiable entity. And so it basically means that actual concrete programs, data model, can be manipulated. And so it warns against mistaking AI's ability to process language for true understanding. And I would love to get your input on what you think about that.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. Let me see if I've understood it correctly. Yeah, I mean, there's always this question about whether it's actually conceptualizing and understanding, or if it's kind of and I'm not sure this is, tell me if I'm wrong, but or if it's kind of looking up things and latching onto things. There's a lot of work done. Yes, work done all the time. The papers flood out every day. I try to stay on top of them. There's a lot of evidence that says it isn't just kind of looking stuff up, that it actually is, in some sense, I don't know how we conceptualize things, but it is putting things in an abstract space. And so it can take the idea of fairness, for example, and, I don't know, or some kind of, or student value for money or something in the university. And it can speak to that. It can kind of attribute things to those concepts. It's a concept-based machine. It puts things in spaces. Now, is it just putting in its spaces like documents that I then go and look up and get the answer? Or is it actually putting them in spaces in an idea sense? And the evidence is that it's doing both. But we do both as well. And so it's probably doing things that we would be doing ourselves, which again is like, I am a supporter of it, but I'm also aware of the risk that in the end it's going to come, whether we like it or not. So yeah, that would be my answer.
Okay,
perfect. Thank you.
Thanks for that question, Brian. I think Robin had their hand up. Do you want to come off mic and ask a question, or is it the one in the chat? I can read it out for you. I'll read it out. Assume your silence is opting for that option. So the question from Robin was, if you use agentic AI over AI. Oh, Robin, you're there. Do you want to ask your question yourself? I'm saying, if you use agentic AI over AI, what about the double tipping point?
Yeah, fantastic question, Rory. So I wake up at night, cold sweat. There are multiple tipping points here. So, but everyone is a single tipping point, if that makes sense. So there'll always be a tip between one and another. You're not going to tip. It's almost like at the top of the mount, it's like, top of a mountain, you could fall one way or the other. Yeah, there are other mountains as well, but you're not going to have them kind of coinciding. It will never happen that they coincide. It may, be one step apart, but it can't coincide, because if it could, you could bundle two of them into one. That's a technical kind of reason. But yeah, absolutely, this can head off and then tip again and tip again and tip again, which is why it's so important to be doing this study, I think.
Awesome. Did that answer your question, Robin? Yeah. Nice. Awesome. Thanks for that question. A couple ones from James here. So I'll read it out as it was in the chat. The first question was, is this development to bad output inevitable or possible to avoid or delay?
Yeah, only possible to avoid or delay if you can identify when it will happen, which is the whole point of the work. It won't necessarily always happen, but a plane doesn't always crash. It's this kind of thing. Even if it was, on a safety, it was low on, safety. A plane is being buffeted from the outside. So that's often one of the reasons you don't quite know. But here, there is no outside. You just have the prompt, and then it processes it all within. It's actually an easier system to deal with. And so this is why it will be, in fact, it will be anti-due diligence to not do what we're talking about here, because the tipping points exist. There's now we're starting to develop formulae, at least in reasonably simple settings, of when this tipping point will be. And so to ignore it is, it's kind of going against due diligence. So bottom line, yes, it will happen. It may happen on page 55 of a document that you're only printing out 33 pages of. True. But eventually it will happen, because there's so many bads compared to a good, unfortunately.
Yeah. So I don't think this was necessarily a follow-up question from James, but as he understands, the current goal is to acquire more data to better predict/control output, diversity, broad experience, but at the same time, who monitors the data input to verify legitimate versus false? Yeah.
Yeah, we don't actually need more data, because there's enough data in there that already, just based on the training, which is kind of good outcomes. I mean, I've got to be careful with the good and the bad. I just mean desirable and undesirable. So undesirable in the case of kind of giving advice would be advice that actually is going to lead to damage, even though the person is kind of pushing for that kind of advice. That would be bad. Good will be where it tries to steer the person in another direction. There are examples of that across the training data. Just think of everything it's been trained on. And so it will, and remember, it's trying to, it doesn't copy sentences from things that it's seen before, but it uses the context of what it's seen before. And so it's seen the context of lots of good, desirable outcomes, and it's seen a lot of undesirable outcomes. And so we don't actually need more data on this. Clearly, if this was being applied in a particular setting in the future, say for in a bank or a university or in a government setting, they would also feed in their own data. So there's a thing called, this kind of RAG, which is where you feed in your own documents, basically. So it has a kind of retrieval augmented generation of output. It's just kind of like a kind of gives it a reference point. But we don't actually need that for looking at these tipping points.
Cool. I think we've got another question from Brian, who has his hand up. Brian, do you want to come off mic?
Yep. Thank you. So just on that point, you talk about there being enough training data out there right now. One of the concerns that I have is that a lot of content on the Internet of Things are now generated by AI. Vast majority of AI is trained on IoT. So generating content that it is training itself off of.
Yes.
It's a cyclical loop. And so
yes,
curious how that's going to be controlled in the future. I mean, you did mention, there are APIs. you can develop AI specifically for medical applications where you can feed it a training data set of just electronic medical records, things like that. And that is much more controlled. But these larger LLMs like ChatGPT and stuff like that, I feel like it might get to a point where things go nuts. So,
Correct. Yes. I mean, okay, a couple of things to say. First of all, these AI are trained on more things than, for example, I'm trained on. It's read all the books I've read, it's read all the papers I've read, and a lot more. And so it knows already a lot more than me. It's made up some of its own training data as well. Yeah, we know that now that, it's kind of that's what it's going to do. It kind of doesn't make it up, but, it kind of generates its own data, and then that's used. It can be used for training. Training only happens once, really. Fine tuning happens. It can happen a lot. But the initial training, that thing that we hear about, costing $500 million, that tends to happen once. And so that's already kind of locked in there. The next round of training may have a lot of artificial data. My own feeling is that that's probably not that bad. I mean, after all, if you think about institutions, I'm not saying anything against my present institution, but it's also feeding off of its own data. It produces stuff. There isn't really a ground truth, and it kind of feeds off of that going forward in the future. So yeah, it doesn't bother me that much, but you're absolutely right. These things are of concern. But again, I didn't go through all the formulae, but we can put those biases in the initial training into the formula, and it just flips. I'm sorry, it moves where the predicted tipping points will therefore occur. So it does take that into account.
thank you. And I'm glad you brought up the corollary of, every institution has their own. And so there is something that mirrors that the concerns with AI. So
That's a really interesting point. Thanks for the question, Brian. Another one from James. In the health field, most clinical studies are limited race, male. Don't we need broader data, multiple races, genetic, male/female, for predicting health outcomes?
Fantastic question. There is an area of where AI is now being used where data doesn't exist, which is it's kind of trying to patch together precisely those limited, this study is only done on this study is only done on this group, this study is only. It kind of looks for a smooth path between those. It's like saying, well, I've only ever visited a place when it was raining, and then I've only ever visited the other place when it was sunny. And so what would the first place be like when it's sunny? And so it tries to connect those two things together and then make predictions for what it's like to go there and, or to go to a third place. So that kind of sparse data prediction based on sparse data is currently under test and being used. And so, like all of these things, ideally we'd have all of this kind of real world data. There isn't enough real world data to actually train it, and there never will be, because you can always do more studies, in experimental studies. But what this does is sort of bridge those gaps in a smooth way, assuming that the answer is some kind of smooth continuation between those, across those gaps.
Awesome. Unless anyone has any other questions, I think that probably rounds out the Q&A portion. I just want to say thanks so much, Neil, for a really interesting conversation. I think AI is as kind of international flight was an amazing invention that maybe has its associated risks. I think AI is also like a really amazing invention. It's going to unlock a ton of value for everyone, here, but also has its kind of associated risks as well. And so, I think it's really important to have voices kind of talking about those risks and how, and when we address the risks, I think there's also ways to nullify them as we have in international flight rate. So it's really important to be thinking about these things. So yeah, thanks so much for the conversation, Neil. Don't know if you want to say any kind of.
No, to your point, we need the paper plane of AI. That's what we're trying to build here. The paper plane. A paper plane would convince me to get in a metal tube and pay $5,000 or $2,000 or $500 or whatever. It would convince me because I could see that something that's too heavy, that actually sits on the ground, usually a piece of paper, can fly. And so, but I don't have that for AI, or we're kind of developing that for AI. That's the trust element.
Yeah. Awesome. We're just going to quickly talk a little bit. I'll just present my screen again here. And yeah, if you could turn yourself on mute just for the next couple of minutes, Neil, that'd be great. Just because that's a bit cool.
Yeah, let me just do that.
Sure. Yeah. Cool. So, yeah, thanks everybody for coming to the talk today. I just want to talk a little bit about Atom and how we're addressing some of these, tipping points in our company. I think Neil spoke a little bit about how people are addressing it across the large organizations. And, at Atom, we use AI and it's deeply integrated into every single bit of our platform. What is Atom? It's a suite of powerful AI tools to help your teams and your faculty diversify your funding streams. And so we do a lot of work to actually use AI to generate grant listings, to pull in grant listings from the internet, find available kind of opportunities from federal, but all the way through to your kind of tail end of your kind of funders, international funders, associations, societies. And so one of the things we do is when we're generating grant listings, we pull in from source documents. So Neil mentioned something called RAG. So what we do is we pull in things from PDFs, from recorded webinars, from the grant listings themselves, and we feed that into an AI system, which is essentially a big context window, which then generates grant listings. And so, as Neil mentioned, that we do have an understanding that at some point AI can fail, right? I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the concept of like hallucinations. Brian, I think, made reference to something along those lines as well. And so AI does have its limitations. But one of the things that we do at Atom is we use these things called evals, which is essentially, as Neil explained, is the way you can catch when things go from good to bad. And so evals is where you bring in, there are multiple different types of evaluations. You can have like a human evaluation. So a human in the loop, basically looking at the output of every single kind of AI generation to just assess, based on their professional expert view, whether this is a good output or not. Obviously, when we're building tools that are used by kind of thousands of researchers and we're generating hundreds of new opportunities because we're trying to help you find those really kind of hidden opportunities across the internet, that doesn't really scale. And so the issue is when you start to scale these systems up, how do you manage that? And so companies have started to introduce things called LLMs as an eval. And this is also kind of speaking to Brian about like the whole dog fooding of like, are you producing content using LLMs that's being trained to being used to train LLMs? Interestingly, you can also use LLMs to evaluate when LLMs go wrong. And you can use humans to train those LLMs to identify what good output looks like, what bad output looks like. And so at Atom, when we're creating these grant listings that your researchers are seeing, or the eligibility the personal eligibility windows that researchers are seeing, these are all being analyzed as we're kind of outputting them to make sure that we catch the moment at which something goes from good to bad. And we essentially we've had some kind of experts in the field create essentially a checkbox, which then an LLM can go off and analyze, does this pass, does this fail? And this is a really kind of scalable and smart way to actually catch when LLMs go wrong. And so that's kind of our best. That's the industry leading solution for making sure LLMs don't go off the rails at the moment, and especially in an industry like higher ed and funding opportunities. We want to make sure that your faculty have the best information possible, right? And so it's really important to us that we ensure that hallucinations aren't happening. And so through the system that we've created, also this turning the temperature down, which means we only kind of write what the information that's fed into LLMs. Yeah, we've managed to achieve a really kind of accurate system. And so if you want to learn a little bit more about how Atom can kind of like the work that we're doing to use AI to help you diversify your funding streams. If there was a question there, I'll come back to that in a second. Yeah, if you want to learn anything about Atom, if you want to chat to me personally, you've got my email here. We are essentially, our platform helps you discover your faculty, discover more grants, and we generate profiles for your researchers. So they, lower the lift on their side so they don't have to do any work to actually start finding those grants. You in the research office can actually control that engagement. And ultimately, we're looking to help you increase your funding in an increasingly uncertain federal scene, help you find those alternative funding sources, and help you drive engagement with the grant process at its earliest phase, in terms of growing the surface area of grants that your researchers are finding. So if you want to meet with me or the team, there's a QR code you can scan on your phones to book a demo with myself or one of my colleagues. And yeah, I just want to say thank you again to Neil. Just before we close out, I think there was maybe someone who raised their hand. Was that an actual question? Okay, cool. Okay. I think you might be in presentation mode, Neil.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries, no worries. Well, look, I just want to say again, thank you to Neil for a fascinating presentation, a fascinating conversation. I think you're doing really interesting work, and yeah, I'm sure everyone here appreciates the time that you put in, and I hope everyone has a great lunch break, and we'll give you back another 15 minutes of it. Alrighty.